certain occasions when the Gambia had the opportunity to rejuvenate itself in certain ways. We can remember in 1981 during the Kuko Samba silent coup attempt. At least the Gambia had an opportunity because we had the sympathy of the whole world. And not only the sympathy, but we had also got a lot of assistance in terms of things were not well managed again, and we kind of reverted back to the old system. Then we had 1994 when Yahya Jammeh and his thugs came to power. And the Gambia actually went in a completely different direction. Well, for 22 years under Yahya Jammeh, we didn't seem to make it what we were supposed to have done, or rather we have not reached the stage that we were supposed to have reached. The opportunities existed, but mismanagement continued as usual, and corruption also became a pain of the regime. Then came the Barrow regime in 2017. Again, a lot of opportunities were available. You can all recall that, the whole world were with us. They supported the Gambia. They were ready to assist the Gambia. We can remember the donor conference that was held in Geneva. A lot of pledges were made. A lot of money was promised to the Gambia. But I can assure you, not even half of the situation. So the donors were not very impressed. So that's again is another lost opportunity. Well, we're supposed to be talking about the governance and 61 years of independence, where did we go wrong? That's the question our panelists are supposed to be answering. And I have absolutely no doubt that they have the capacity to be able to answer those questions. Where did we go wrong? Did we actually go wrong somewhere? Yes, indeed, we went wrong. Because, as I said, the Gambia should not have been at this stage. We should have passed this stage a very, very long time ago. But unfortunately, the situation is that. There are a lot of things. The way they are handled in this country is definitely not the correct way to have done it. A good example in case recently we had the Minister of Basic and Secondary Education telling us about the plan to launch 7 local languages to be taught in our schools. You can't imagine that. What kind of confusion are they bringing in our local schools, in our schools? It's definitely hard to understand. when the Mandinka teacher comes out, then the Manjaro teacher comes in, then the Fula teacher comes in. At the end of the day, the children get more confused. So these are all legal situations that actually the government should have missed the point. Anyway, I'm just a moderator, so I should now call on the panelists to give us an answer as to where we have gone. As I said, ladies first, so maybe I should start with Ms. Salma Gibbs. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and good morning to you all, to my fellow panelists as well. And as Mr. Denver has stated, I am here in representation of Mrs. Hannah Foster and ACHRS. Hopefully, with her remarks, I'll be able to answer some of the questions that we have in our minds today. And I'll start by stating or saying again hello to everyone, my distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I bring you warm greetings from the Executive Director, Mrs. Hannah Foster, of the African Center for Democracy and Human Rights Studies. Of course, who regrettably could not be present in person this morning. Though she has asked me to convey her appreciation to the organizers and the partners for this convening, which convenes a timely and necessary reflection, as spoken about. My name is Salan Gibbs. I am the Programs Manager for ACHRS, and I'm representing her today. And I thank you for the opportunity to contribute in this important national reflection. The Executive Director has maintained that independence is not merely an anniversary to commemorate, but the standard against which we must continuously measure our governance, institutions, and collective national conscience. It is therefore in the spirit of the responsibility reflected on her behalf. As mentioned, 61 years after independence, the Gambia stands at a moment that calls for honesty and proper reflection. The Gambia is sovereign, that is not a question. The deeper question is whether independence has translated into dignity, justice, and accountable governance, and economic security for the majority of Gambians. When we ask where did we go wrong, we must approach the question structurally. This is not about individuals or personalities. It is rather about systems, the institutional and political patterns that have shaped our trajectory across the decades to date. Political independence in 1965 was indeed a historic achievement. However, political sovereignty alone does not guarantee social and economic justice. Across all three political phases of our history, the First and Second Republics, and post-2017 democratic transition, inequality and poverty have remained persistent features of everyday life. Recent years have seen increased public spending and significant borrowing, yet citizens continue to grapple with rising costs of living, an unstable electricity supply, youth unemployment, and gaps in education, health services, and infrastructure. Likewise, the continued migration of young Gambians through irregular routes is a powerful indicator that many do not feel economically secure within the state. At the same time, there have been successes that must be acknowledged. The establishment and operationalization of institutions such as the National Human Rights Commission have strengthened rights discourse. Civil society space has expanded significantly since 2017. Investigative journalism has become more vibrant and explorative, and these are important democratic gains. True empowerment cannot be achieved through independence alone. It must be accompanied by economic justice. The Gambia's governance trajectory reveals another pattern. Democratic forms without consistent democratic outcomes. The First Republic delivered electoral continuity, but did not sufficiently institutionalize accountability. The Second Republic introduced constitutional structures and undertook large-scale infrastructure development. Yet that era was also marked by gross human rights violations, deep institutional weakening, and suppression of dissent. The post-2017 transition brought significant successes. Large-scale human rights abuses subsided. The Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission created an unprecedented record of past violations and gave victims a voice. Civic space reopened. Political pluralism expanded. And there are certainly meaningful achievements. Yet reform has stalled in key areas, as stated by Mr. Moderator. The failure to adopt a new constitution with strengthened term limits the clearer separation of powers was a major setback. Implementation of TRRC recommendations has now been slowed and contested. Executive dominance over the National Assembly remains a concern. Access to information legislation exists, and yet its full potential has not been realized in practice. Whilst democracy has been restored procedurally, transformation remains incomplete. It must be stated that elections alone do not consolidate democracy. Governance must deliver accountability. Institutional fragility remains is an ever-recurring theme. Oversight bodies exist, yet effectiveness often depends on political cooperation rather than guaranteed autonomy. Parliamentary oversight has improved in visibility but remains constrained by structural imbalances. Recent public debates around procurement practices, public debt levels, and transparency in major contracts demonstrate both progress and weakness. The progress is that these issues are not publicly scrutinized. The weakness is that follow-through and corrective measures are not always clear or timely. Citizens' empowerment has grown in voice, but not always in sustained engagement. Social media activism is vibrant, yet often polarized. Public discourse has become sharper, sometimes drifting into hate speech and identity politics rather than constructive policy debate. Similarly, we must recognize successes. Youth activism, women's advocacy movements, and civil society coalitions have increasingly shaped public discourse. Media freedom has expanded compared to the past. These foundations for a stronger democratic culture. However, where institutions remain weak and polarization deepens, accountability struggles to take root. Although we describe our history in three political phases, structural continuities cut across them. Executive power has remained heavily concentrated. Oversight mechanisms have existed, but have often struggled to function independently of political influence. Patronage-based incentives continue to shape political behavior, sometimes prioritizing loyalty over merit and weakening public trust. Institutional independence remains fragile. The culture of enforcement remains inconsistent, and public scrutiny, though more vocal than ever before, has not translated into systemic pressure. Leadership and political rhetoric have changed, but the underlying architecture of governance has not transformed at the depth required. Without confronting these continuities, we risk treating each administration as an isolated episode rather than understanding the deeper institutional patterns that define our trajectory. Now, where do our gaps remain? Upon reflection over the past 60 years, it is evident that the nation did not collapse completely, but rather, particular institutional foundations were never completely established. First, while we established formal checks and balances, the practical resilience of those systems has changed over the years. Oversight institutions have at times depended heavily on political alignment and goodwill rather than asserting structural integrity. Strengthening these safeguards remains an ongoing task. Second, reform momentum has often been strong at policy level, but less consistent in implementation. We have produced important laws, commissions, and recommendations. The next phase is to ensure that reform is part of regular governance. Third, social and economic justice have not always evolved at the same time as political reform. Thus, many citizens have experienced democracy procedurally through elections, but not always materially in their daily lives. Bridging that gap is central to long-term sustainability and stability. Finally, while citizens' voice has grown significantly, particularly in the post-2017 period, translating civic participation into long-term institutional accountability remains a work in progress. These are not failures of a single government or era. They are structural gaps that have evolved across political periods. An act of accusation, it is an act of national responsibility. Now what lies ahead? This conversation must move beyond mere diagnosis. The importance of this forum lies in its potential to produce concrete commitments that are measurable, time-bound, and shared by state and non-state actors. If the citizens' charter that emerges from this gathering is clear, realistic, and sustained through civic monitoring, it can help us shift from reflection to reform. Independence secured our sovereignty. The task before us now is to strengthen accountability and institutional integrity in this next chapter of our democratic journey. As I conclude, allow me to reiterate the principle of the Executive Director, who's often emphasized in national and regional spaces, that democratic consolidation is not achieved through rhetoric alone. It is achieved through institutions that function, laws that are implemented, and citizens who remain engaged. This forum represents an opportunity not merely to diagnose where we have fallen short, but also to articulate a concrete, shared roadmap for restoration. We can leave this gathering with measurable commitments, clear responsibilities, and a collective willingness to strengthen institutional integrity. Then these reflections will have served a purpose. On behalf of the Executive Director and ACDHRS, I do thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this important dialogue. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Gibbs. It's not a surprise that she has given us a good gist of what all these issues are supposed to be. Of course, in her intervention, she acknowledged that there have been successes, but a lot of things are not going the way they were supposed to have gone. For instance, she mentioned about weak institutional framework, and that is a problem in this country. As long as the institutions are weak, it would be extremely difficult for governance to be the way it is supposed to be. Anyway, now we call on Dr. Ansa Ture, who's a lecturer at the UTG, and we'll get his perspective to the issue as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is important today to reflect on the day that actually created a Gambian personality in the present government. And before that, let me thank Mr. Legislator. In such challenging, I think the issues of the issues that I think how? zone. Therefore, our independence or our sophistication was actually similar to those in other parts of the country. In order to situate what was wrong in our economy, it is important for us to look at what happened until our situation was actually created. Africa began to lose its sovereignty as a continental entity since 16th century. But many of us are not talking about that simply because most of the government, about 60% to 70% of the government, lack capacity and competence in historical knowledge. In order to understand this very well, we're supposed to be conscious of the global system, and within the global system analysis, we'll be able to understand what went wrong. Our independence as people and continental soul began to shrink in the 16th century, owing to our understanding of the global context and economy. 16th century, global economy was actually centered on slavery. And why? Because Africa was actually subjugated, not conquered, but Africa was influenced. And what actually influenced Africa? The 15th century was actually 150 or 200 years after the downfall of Mali. During the era of Mali, African states were independent, and they were not actually subjugated by outside force. Although initial imperialist expansionist policy adopted by Arabs in the 7th to 8th century, they failed because Ghana Empire was able to adopt a kind of territorial and that of a territorial policy that actually repulsed Arabs' expansionist agenda and imperial agenda. And Ghana exists as an independent zone, controlling all the resources, and they actually monopolized gold nugget, and thus was available, which can confirm that Ghana was one of the Pan-African states that was first of all created and established against the Arab expansionist policy around the 8th century or 7th century or 8th century, where we had an independence they could not penetrate. Just to give you historical background of how our independence was actually affected. In the 13th century, regionally or subcontinental empire emerged called the Mali Empire. And they adopted expansionist policy where they radiated their influence over this area, Senegambia area. And all other areas became part of Mali. But Malian policy and whatever was to ensure that people had the capacity to actually influence the state governance. You can understand that the space of history where governance was people-driven, it was not actually state-driven. And this is where our independence was affirmed. And that was why, before Sunjata Keita himself became a sovereign imperial emperor, there had to be a constitution in force, that is Kurukan Furka. Although Kurukan Furka is a Mandinka state, Kuru means assembly. So the democracy we are talking even about today, the concept and the condition were already in the pre-colonial space. When they say Kuru means the assembly of the people, Furka means authority. And in the modern time, democracy means authority of the people, which means African had the concept of democracy in their governance well before the rise of modern educational system and political science, discipline and government. So that's why when we are dealing with Africa to assess or examine our independence, our economy, we need to actually link it to broader historical context in order to actually observe the evolution of our domination in the global system and why we are still sovereign and still now we are dependent and we constitute periphery of the world system. Many Gambians don't understand it. That's why the current elite force of this country can never actually change the political and economic direction because failure to understand history. When people don't have the knowledge of self, they can be easily conquered ideologically, continentally, and any, because your history is one of the instruments and guide to ensure your existence within the context of political independence. Kurukam Furukam, as I said, mean Kuru mean assembly in Mandinkatam, Foka mean authority. Democracy is people authority, not so democracy. So it means that already the concept was with Africa. And you people don't understand, failure to understand your history. You just try to link everything to Western civilization. You cannot change the current contemporary African situation until you build capacity in culture and history. And your economy will be, you will remain peripheral because you don't understand how to even adopt or construct an economic system that is aligned. Sunjata Keita could not even assume power until when that law or constitution was put into force. And go and look at the chart provision of Kurkan laws and look at the human rights laws. That led to Malian expansion over this area, where even if each of the territory or vast state selected or elected a candidate as a governor or farim, you must travel to Mali so that your capacity could be built on the governance of the Sokoto. They were doing capacity. That's where Sameke Jamme, Banajasi, Jalankonko, and Futa whatever went to Mali. 3-month capacity building training in governance accordingly, so that they will not actually exercise unnecessary power against their citizens. How do you know all this? Because you don't know, you are reading, understanding modern governance, thinking that white man was the originator of all this system. If people are not oriented, educated in history, because they adopt the system. Today, Gambia government adopt a British citizens. So Sadauda came to power, adopted a British colonial system. The independence was completely a different. He realized independent. White man left. They adopted an internal structural system of how minority white, and they perpetuated minority Gambian elite forces who control the people, just like white man. But you know that all the governors were appointed also by the government. During the colonial era, all the commissioners were appointed by the government. Is it not today, up to Sadauda's time, commissioners were they not appointed by the government? So what has changed? You can't understand because your history in governance, you understand it based on the colonials, but you don't understand what we had. First of all, to actually examine the context of our independence and democracy. It's a sad situation for African people. It's a sad situation. Do we have such political governance where it constitutes people-driven and people-mandate? Sunjata could not make any decision. When Yomi King was a foreign governor, he could not do certain things because they were all supervised by the Mali Empire. But what happened that constitutes a shift in global governance and politics? Your failure in history, even reinforce the significance of. Many of you don't even want your children to major in history. The white man makes you a capitalist personality to understand that you need to work and be educated, to work to accumulate wealth, to reinforce your honor in your society. But you can't be African personalities. 80% of the Gambian elites are not African personalities. Unless you go back and read history, that is why we are proposing it to Minister of Basic Education and Higher Education. Charles Darwin theory made white man to feel their supremacy in the world system. Okay. Charles Darwin theory actually reinforced the conception of white man theory, supremacy over black man. And one of the leading scholars who emerged in the 19th century, came up with historical framework and theoretical framework to alter the bad notion against African personality, Sheikh Anta Diop. His work is a complete opposite. Opposite to what is Charles Darwin established against black man. Today, in Quran and the Bible today, the only two pharaohs known is the pharaoh that had contact with Moses, encounter with Moses. Not so? There, whether Christianity or Islam, they know only two pharaohs, and most of them conceptualize or rationalize these pharaohs as white or Arabs. No, these were all black African people. Pharaoh Sarateta was a Serere. Pharaoh Sar was a Serere from Upper Egypt. Pharaoh Peribsen was a Serere, and Pharaoh Osodasen was a Serere. Most of the government don't know this, and this is what is going to lead us to how we fell in our independence into political or Republican sphere. You don't know this because most of you are thinking pharaohs were white people. Yes. Yes. But they were all black people because we were the first human being on earth. You're independent, you can't actually institute any form of civilization or independence if you are not culturally independent. That has to do with your mind, your existence, your heritage. The Almighty God created first man in Africa. Let me tell you one thing. I'm going to push you down. Adam was created in Africa here. He was not created in heaven. Because there is no art, no clay in the up there, scientifically. And God didn't mention in the Quran or Bible where Adam was created. He said, I created this world in 6 days and I established my throne above the water. That's a Quranic verse. But the water signifies what? That's why when the early anthropologists made their research, they were able to establish that the first man came from Africa. Great Lake River is in Africa. And Allah mentioned water in the Quran. People are still thinking water constitutes 70%. And at the time of the creation of man, Homo sapiens, Africa was the only continent that had sunlight. So, first man cannot be created anywhere. But there was no human habitation. Europe was not habitable. Middle East and Asia, they were not all habitable. The black man who left through Sudan, Gibraltar, Italy, and southern France, who after the glaciation born a white man called Cro-Magnon from African black people. But I am taking you far for you to understand that in order for you to get economic and political independence, you have to have knowledge of history. This continent will remain periphery of the world system, and we are centrally responsible for our peripheralization in the world system. This is what you need to understand. How could people try to discuss or adopt independent analysis? People who don't even know your history, their history. It's an embarrassment. That's why history is supposed to be a goal for every person in this country. But it's a direction. So this was at that time. Mali withdrew in the 15th century. That coincided with the coming of the European capitalists. That was the time European capitalist people, what happened? They had to move out because if not, at the time Europe was initially a periphery of the world system. I am telling you how we lost our economic independence owing to influence of European and capitalist nations in the world. One, Europe had to engage Africa. Their relation with Africa actually was based on economic relations, legitimate trade, not initially slave trade. Until when America was discovered, strategic for European capitalist economic development. That was with time, in order for them to optimize production and to realize their economic agenda in American jurisdiction or continental zones, they needed labor force. And why were you people identified as labor force to drive European agenda in the United States of America? Why? What must have saved European humanistic mind to subject his mind to understand that African personality deserved to be enslaved? And this is the beginning where your periphery in the global economy will begin. Because you are supplying human capital to Europe. And Europe could not just come to Africa to influence African people. When Mali withdrew owing to invasion of Songhai, so Malian withdrawal from Senegambian zone led Kabu to emerge, Jolof Empire to emerge. In the 17th century, Fouta Jalon Imamate emerged. Europeans were actually minority. What must have actually given them the opportunity and power to influence African states? Mali was independent in the world system. Ghana was independent. They crossed down of Arab from the North Africa or from the Middle East. And Ghana remained and existed as viable state. Mali came in Mali, Songhai came in Mali, until we had University of Sankore. That's supposed to be the basis of that shape our scientific knowledge and scientific direction, where we could compete with the European world as co-equals in the world system or in the global scientific system. Now, Kabu was actually situated very critically. Why was it that in the 16th century, slave trading and the export of slaves was actually instituted? Why? You don't have the technology and technological sophistication over African states. That's why if you are dealing with economy in Africa, once your manipulation of technology is weak, you will remain as periphery of the world system. Go and read Walter Roscoe, The Stages of Economic Growth. Look at how we are influenced. European powers through Portuguese and subsequent France and England, they had to influence Kabu. That's why Kabu was never an African. The Nyanchos and the Koreans were never African personalities. Whoever might have thought of Kabu or whatever, my mother was a Kabuka. My mother was Mali. But I am telling you, Kabu, Koreans and Nyanchos were never African personalities. They were influenced and adopted a political and internal structural governance, structural change. This is where Korea and Nyanchoya were actually inaugurated. One to provide defense for only the aristocrats. That is to militarize the state. They were actually accepting accommodated European weapons, and they actually opened the entire population under their rules and governance to vulnerability. Kabu began to raid and sell slaves. So you can understand that this was the period after the withdrawal of Mali, West African sub-Saharan population's independence and sovereignty ended at that time in the 16th century. Because your state like Kabu, Jolof, which were actually established according to the mandate of the people, according to the dictate of the people, were already influenced, and they shifted allegiance, and they actually militarized and consolidated their position to defend the royals and to open people to enslavement. This was the beginning of the weakening of African state powers. Okay. So this was the time of that. So Kabu was a predatory state, Jolof was a predatory state, and that of the Fouta Jalon Imamate was a predatory state. The end of the slavery was in the early 18th century. And in the 19th century, we can understand that they introduced, when Europe could not actually penetrate America after American War of Independence, African Jews, they must actually create or design a new form of relation with Africa, economic relation with Africa, centered on commodity or non-slave commodities. This is where peanut was introduced. Your economy this will confirm how you end your economic independence. Cotton was introduced. Other non-human commodities were introduced. They had to influence Africa to adopt this form of production system. That marked the end of your economy. So you can understand that in the 19th century, latter part of the 19th century, British intervened to end the mandate of Fode Silla Toure, to end the mandate of Fode Silla, number one, to end the mandate of Maba, to end the mandate of some of the jurisdictional leaders. And their intervention led to actually total dismemberment of the Gambia. Gambia was dissolved into a district. All the chiefs who were appointed by the governors, not by our people. That confirmed the beginning of the end of the mandate. End of the mandate of the people of the Gambia. 62 years of European governance. They end our economy, they use their political governance and sophistication to influence their economic agenda. If Gambians were going for independence, for example, Sadauda, but we can tell you, Sadauda was not the initiator of Gambian independence. He never, when he was working for the British, Sadauda didn't have the initiative spirit or Pan-African spirit to even write against the colonial. The only person we can say who used formal Spanish was Edward Francis Small. Apart from Edward Small, 6 elders from Cambodia were the one who pursued the independence because they were the one who challenged the European the justification of the disenfranchisement of the people of the rural people. One farmer for Jomo Bojang, Fawadi Bojang, Sanjani Bojang, for Sebda Namba, and of Fatou Sanjang of Farm. They were the one they were not educated in conventional education. They questioned the justification of the disenfranchisement of the rural population until they were able to influence Europe, where they acted upon the scope of what? Electoral process to include the rural population. Sadauda never had. He was a capitalist personality, working for the federal. When these elders went to Dr. Marena, that was the time Dr. Marena recommended Sadauda. But when we talk about our independence, these people, the heroes were actually silenced. We never talk about that. So now, when Sadauda was allowed to take the independence with his colleagues, but these were African personalities at the Sadauda who never understand African history. Because European intervention to subject us to peripheral state in the global economy was as a result of the introduction of peanut. At the same time, non-human commodities. One, they take the political mandate, they should actually dismantle and alter political structures that were actually utilized and manipulated by the colonialists to actually subject Gambians to that periphery in governance and economy. But Sadauda did not do that. The first government did not do that. Peanut was one of the dangerous threats. And Sadauda came with Banjul Declaration. It was a theory. That is why in Guinea-Bissau, America Cabral, an agronomist, mobilized his people to fight against the promotion of peanut production because it was actually a threat to our ecology in Africa. From Karang down to Dakar, everywhere was different. Only to promotion of peanut because Sadauda and Seymour were all capitalist personalities. Look at the America Cabral. He fought against it. Today, 70% of the forest cover of Guinea-Bissau is intact. About 70% of the Gambian forest is gone because we promoted instead of changing production or commercializing or commoditizing peanut. Instead of commercializing rice or commoditizing, we promote peanut. At the end of the day, today, when Europeans adopted their ecological conditions arable for peanut cultivation, our peanut is not actually accepted in the market. So we can say that our independence was not actually pursued in the right way. Personalities who were bad were not African personalities. Because that's why Gambia and Senegal, you can see the frustration. That's why Senghor contributed to the killing of Sheikh Anta Diop. On that note, understand the whole system and the trajectory and evolution within the context of global economy. To understand how African elites and the Gambian elites during the independence actually failed to examine and assess colonial economic agenda centered on capitalist regime. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Ture. I'm sure we have had a very good dose of history today. A lot of things we have learned from Dr. Ture. I'm sure most of us didn't know that. We didn't know that Adam was created in Africa. Probably the Garden of Eden was here in the Gambia. It's all possible. And the other thing also that some of the pharaohs were Syrian. So I can imagine probably my big brother there, Philip Sen, was a direct descendant of the pharaohs. Of course, he has said a lot of important things here. That the concept of democracy actually existed since the Mali Empire. So it is not a new concept which has been brought by the Europeans. And a lot of other historical lessons, and I'm sure some of us would make the best use of it in our time. And I understand there is supposed to be a third panelist. One Abla Hussein is supposed to be on the panel. I'm not sure whether he's around. All right. Sorry, it should be Ali Hussein, not Ablai. Ali Hussein, are you around? Okay. Oh, he's not yet here. Okay, anyway. So you've heard about my panelists. You've heard about this important topic which has been dealt with effectively by the two panelists. One was looking at it from the governance aspect. Of course, as I said, the African Center had been very much instrumental in organizing, governance forums and other things. So they are very vast in that area. Then we've had from the historical perspective, perspective of governance from Dr. Ture. So on behalf of everybody else, I thank my panelists and I thank all of you also for listening attentively to the situation. Thank you very much.
We're going to give you like 5 minutes to allow.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you, Mike. Yes, okay, now we are inviting questions from the floor. To any of the panelists.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Mamba Abuso. I just come now, but I heard my brothers talking about independence, colonialism, and neo-colonialism. We have gone through stages of enslavement. It was slavery, then colonialism, then neo-colonialism. It was colonialism, it was slavery. Why was slavery? Because there were no machines. Why slavery was abolished? Because of the Industrial Revolution. We started in 1816. Kunta Kinte was among the last slaves to be taken from our motherland. Slave is about capitalism for production. They use our own brothers to cultivate for them. After, they went to Bali and partitioned Africa, and they came back again and colonized us. For many years, hundreds of years, the crops that we used to cultivate in the plantations were transferred to Africa again for us to continue the slavery for production. Either mining
or plantation. If there are mines, they will take our resources. If there are no mines, they will continue the plantations. That's why they introduced the groundnut to continue the slave trade. When our forefathers cultivate the groundnut, they take 80% and give the farmers 20%. Huh? Pardon? Yes. So being the case, you mentioned Abel Cabral. Cabral was a liberation fighter. He diverted. He changed the economy of Guinea-Bissau. He liberated his people. He nullified tribalism and sectarian, even the region. Because don't forget, the Arabs were the first to enslave us. The Trans-Saharan slave trade, they changed our names. Then after they brought this Atlantic slave trade, that's what brought Christianity. This is why we are divided on religious line, on tribal line, and economic line. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mine is going to be rather short. I think it's important that we do look at the facts a little bit more detached. Independence and the population of West Africa was actually in a much better position than those in East Africa because there were more educated people within the local populations. But I think where we are standing now as a way forward, does the panel agree that we should start educating the younger ones that things like 1981 was not Senegalese killing Gambians, but Gambians killing Gambians? I think that is very, very important because that does highlight the dangers of some of the grabbing of assets, lands, etc., and disenfranchising the people does constitute a danger that could be far, far worse than a lot of things that have gone by. I mean, 81 was well before the problems in Sierra Leone. It was well before the problems in Liberia and other places. So I think to try and look forwards and to try and see what the possible outlets or outcomes of some of these things. You did ask about getting data. No, this is not a question, but basically a lot of the data that's available from Gambia, you can actually get by going onto the British website for the Parliament. And one of the things that the British did to us before independence was that they actually handed over the transatlantic flights to Senegal, and that was blatantly obvious. So I think we should look at the possibilities of what our faultings are, how we try and stop the kids from going by the back way, and why the hell are we allowing the fish meal plants to be burning 5 tons of fish to make 1 ton of fish meal to go and feed their pigs, then now they can then try and export it back to us. What had happened in the past, I agree, we should know where we came from, but let's stop looking at our belly buttons and start looking ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. So I have a question on the issue of how or where we went wrong. And for me, I'm doing a bit of writing at the moment, and I'm looking at things from 2 perspectives. The first one is we have to look at the colonial structure, right? Gambia was a colony and a protectorate, and for me that has always been an issue. Considering the fact that now we're talking about sovereign citizenship, how can a country that was divided, and in that and the protectorate was mostly traditional law governed. So it's a community or a part of the country that is not used to the common law system, to these nation-state structures and rules that we are familiar with today. But after independence, they are expected to fall in line and be part of that structure. I think that has created this tension where, citizens are not really active participants in the process. How do we dislodge that kind of circumstance? I felt transitional justice was an opportunity to take stock of that and be part of the structural reforms. It didn't happen. The other aspect of the question is external. Or just before independence, their sovereignty doesn't matter as long as you are formally recognized by this international system that you are a sovereign nation. So the sovereignty is not with the people, but with the elite structures of government. How do we deal with that as well? Because I think those are the two situations that we didn't address at independence, and that is why we are struggling still to be independent, calling ourselves independent, but still independent. I think that needs to be considered.
Okay. Thank you very much, Imran. And both Imran and Mr. Semega Jane, you made some very, very pertinent issues, I mean, as far as the governance aspect is concerned. And so I'm not sure whether any of the panelists is willing to make a comment on those two issues. Salman?
You see, historical background, that's why we fail in everything that we do. Saddam's regimes could have actually dismantled peanut industry and commoditize or commodify rice, which is still our basic staple in this country. But failure to actually adopt and engage in peanut production for quite a number of years actually led us to a decline of the rice. Today we are depending on global market for importation of the rice. And you know that American rice today is not a good rice. Saddam, even that's why people are not educated. When people have the knowledge of self, there are certain things they will not expose themselves to that. They will reject most of the rice imported in this country. You all know how we even sing our lullaby because of the purity of the rice we produce in this country. If rice is commoditized, everyone will go there and they will get capital out of the rice cultivation. Minimum. So this was what has not been, because the state was interested in foreign exchange. But at the end of the day, they didn't understand scientific dynamism or technological dynamism of the world. When these people adopted their ground and their environment to actually cultivate peanut, ours was actually subjected to, has been subjected to quarantine also. And we are losing the price. Just because I am telling you something you don't understand. Why is it that? Because that industry is dead today, and we cannot create any industry. Secondly, if a nation state is to be independent, you must make sure that you build people's capacity in governance. That is national sovereignty. Are you paying attention here? Here in the first place, that's why Kwame Nkrumah started building universities, science and technology. I think he sent an empty aeroplane to come and pick people to go and study free. Because he wanted to actually start his continental framework. The people's capacity need to be built. But what giant step did Saddam take in order to make sure build the capacity? He came with Testo as a theoretical propaganda, but Testo without corresponding technical capacity for the Gambians. Today, why is CSC building here in the Gambia? CSC build the road from here to Khartoum because Senegalese have the capacity. Why? And they are discussing all these profits in their country. Today, University of Gambia, UTG Al Faraba, they are building it. And that company that is building UTG is called Saponji Polonji. It was established in 1864, 170 years ago. No technical capacity. People to be awakened, to know their world by rejecting them television station. That could help us to define the man as a soft dictator using institutional detachment, disturbing them so that he will be able to control them. That's why I call Niso Yasit Dauda, Akabalu. I Gambia Beke Nisoti. Gambia no Nisiake, follow Pakola economy team. So what we are telling you is that look at the trajectories in capacity building. It's very poor. Well, do we have people, anybody in the country, more than 20 people with masters in the road engineering? In the road engineering, do we have that? How do you expect the economy? Indians are taking out all this because they are one building. Because you refuse to build because you're thinking that once people become awakened, your existence as a political leader is threatened. Even today, Gambians are adopting this attitude. University of the Gambia was established in 2000 or 1999. Geography department does not have a single Gambian with a PhD. Development studies, only 2 PhD. So you see the attitude of the Gambians. They don't want people to grow intergenerationally, and they are clamoring for independence. What kind of life is this? We need to change our mentality. Saddam was so trapped in capacity. That's why he constrained it.
Sorry, Saddam has not been power for completing power for more than 30 years. Time to look again.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Dr. Ture. Thank you, Dr. Ture. I mean, you've got Philip Sen. You want to say something?
There's a mic here. Yes.
It looks like we are having a heated debate now. Let's not stray beyond what we intend to focus on to. We said 61 years. I thought we would be looking at those 61 years and see where we went wrong and how to improve on that. Now, taking me back up to the Pharaoh period, I used to do history until at high school when I dropped it because of dates. I hated history then, quoting dates, because I couldn't remember the dates. I would know the story, but I couldn't attach it with the dates. So I dropped history. I have learned a lot from Ture's intervention here. I also have, and I have still a lot of his statement which I would say, what is your source of reference? I would like to see the source of reference. Let's put all those aside because it would delay us. Now, coming back for these 61 years, we have 3 administrations. The blame onto Jawara, the first administrator, is unfair because that was, and it was the colonial masters were still around when Jawara was on. They didn't leave the Gambia 18 February 65. No, they were still here, holding offices and running offices. So call that period a transition. The first republic, to be fair with him, he was undergoing a transition. If you come the first day and you kick out everything, you are doomed. Then he achieved a lot. He failed in a lot. Of course, we give that excuse. But then we go to the Second Republic. That is where we should have obtained our momentum. But we diverted, we went into dictatorship. These are the ugly things. Why did we go into that? Then we went into the Third Republic. Things are still not satisfactory. We have the 3 evils affecting us here. Is it the European that brought the corruption? Haven't we seen the corruption with us up till now? The Fankul habit, all our. So we need to change our character, our behavior, make it Gambian again. Yes, to make it Gambian, you need to go back to history to find out what was the attitude, what was the character. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Philip Sen. And I think our time, we definitely run out of time. Just a moment, let's give it
Hello, everyone, and I think that if I may add further reflection, and I'm speaking from the human rights and governance perspective, so do bear with me. But I think it's not only important to speak from where we've fallen short, but also the significance of the Gambia as a foreign state within the African system. And sovereignty is not merely a political status, it is a responsibility that signifies that we as a people have the authority to shape our governance and define our developmental priorities, also to protect the dignity of our citizens without external domination. So, in essence, I do understand colonialism, neocolonialism, but as the kind sir stated, moving forward, do we still hold on to those systems, or do we find ways to and solutions to actually combat what's happening systematically or around us? I think moving forward, we've come a long way in terms of, as I stated, civic space before and freedom of expression. And we do have everything in terms of systems such as the TRRC, but what are we doing to ensure that these systems are actually promoted and evolve from moving forward? So I think that, speaking on Gambia as part of the African system, it's important to understand that as part of the African Charter as well, we do have systems of protection that Gambia is actually part of or has ratified within its governance system. So it's important to acknowledge that there are systems in play to protect us as Africans, as citizens. But in terms of the protections for them to be engaged and actively used, it's important for forums such as these, CSOs, of course, the media, and everyone to come together and work to make sure that these systems are actually actively engaged. I just wanted to state that very briefly, and hopefully that resonates.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gibbs. We have actually run out of time completely. So, Dr. Ture, please, just 1 minute, please, because we have definitely run out of time.
That's why we are failing as people. The reason why I link you to pharaohs, I have to break. For example, we need to give you your history to situate your glorious path in order to have the inspiration to build today. To build today. People use their history against you at any time at the global platform. Who you are, first of all. So that's why any nation state whose leader doesn't know, or whose leader, leader that took them to independence does not know anything or did not know anything about the history of the land and the people, will never situate the context of their independence according to the life of the people. That's why after colonialism, the PPP regime could not actually dismantle colonial monumental structure. So you can understand today. So that's why we need to go back to history, for example, to understand it. In fact, most of you, culturally, we are nowhere, owing to failure to institute and universities, whatever, for people to know themselves. Even me, I came to know about this when the university started in this country. I am teaching people to understand who they are as black personalities. So if we cannot situate ourselves and generate new African personality through historical inspiration, we are not going to create anything. That era was actually, we know that centralized despotism adopted after colonialism is still affecting us today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ture. As I said, we've run out of time completely. So thank you very much, all of you, for listening as well. And thanks to my panelists as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Uncle Dear and the panel. We will take a short health break and then we'll resume with the next panel. So help yourself, there's coffee and biscuits at the back and water as well. And those who want to stretch, you may as well do so.